Joseph was a simple miller, living in a small village at the edge of a sprawling wheat field. His life was calm, his days long, but always full of hard work. His mill stood by a babbling stream, where water powered the great wheel that turned the grinding stones. From sunrise to sunset, Joseph worked tirelessly, grinding grain into fine flour for the people of the village. Joseph was well liked. He was known for his honesty, his kindness, and his willingness to help others. If a family in the village couldn't pay for the flour, Joseph would still grind their wheat, telling them to pay him when they could. His heart was kind, and his reputation grew as people trusted him. Each morning, Joseph began his day early. He'd carry heavy sacks of wheat to his mill, smiling at the rising sun. His apprentice, Peter, was a young boy eager to learn the trade, always ready to help carry the grain or clean the mill when Joseph needed it. Peter had been working with Joseph for a few years now, and the boy admired Joseph greatly for his work ethic and fairness. Joseph's mill wasn't the largest, nor was it the fanciest, but it was reliable. It ground flour for the villagers, helping them make bread and other foods. The air around the mill smelled of fresh grain and flour, and the sound of the turning wheel was a familiar and comforting one. On quiet afternoons, the only noise was the wind whispering through the wheat fields. While Joseph worked, his thoughts were always on the well-being of the village. He did his best to live a simple life and never complained. The villagers trusted him not just for his work, but because of the way he treated everyone. People could count on Joseph, and in a world where deceit often ruled, that meant everything. Mark was the complete opposite of Joseph. While Joseph was humble and kind-hearted, Mark was rich and greedy. He lived in a grand house at the center of the village, far from the simplicity of Joseph's mill. Mark was a merchant who sold all sorts of goods, from cloth to spices. But unlike the honest traders in the market, Mark was known for cutting corners. He would sell inferior goods at inflated prices, and if a customer complained, he would find ways to talk his way out of it. Mark never cared for anyone but himself. His goal was to get richer, no matter how many people he had to deceive along the way. He would trick the villagers into buying goods that were less than what they were promised, charging high interest rates for loans, and even using false weights when selling grain. Mark's envy of Joseph grew day by day. It baffled him how a simple miller could earn so much respect, while he, with all his riches, had so little. The villagers praised Joseph for his kindness, while they spoke ill of Mark's underhanded dealings. It made Mark angry, and the thought of Joseph's popularity gnawed at him. One evening, as Mark sat in his large home, surrounded by fine furniture and expensive possessions, he began to hatch a plan. I need to get rid of that miller's good reputation, he thought to himself. If people see Joseph as nothing more than a simple fool, they'll stop praising him, and I will be the one everyone looks up to. The next morning, Mark put his plan into action. He arrived at Joseph's mill, dressed in his finest clothes, wearing a wide, fake smile. "Good morning, Joseph," Mark said, with feigned cheerfulness. "I have an offer for you. I need a large amount of wheat ground into flour. If you help me, I will pay you generously. Think of it as a chance to make some extra money." Joseph, ever the trusting man, agreed without hesitation. "I'll do my best, Mark," he said, shaking the merchant's hand. "How much wheat do you need?" Mark smiled slyly. "Enough to keep you busy for several days, Joseph. I'll leave the sacks here. Do not worry about the payment. I will make sure you are well compensated." The sacks Mark left behind were heavier than Joseph had expected, so he called Peter over to help move them into the mill. Together, they carried the grain and set it up for grinding. Joseph didn't think twice about the unusual size of the order. He just wanted to get to work. For the next few days, Joseph worked tirelessly, grinding the wheat into fine flour. The millstone groaned under the weight of the grain, but Joseph didn't stop. He was used to hard work. But as the days wore on, he began to notice something strange. The grain seemed to have an unusually high amount of husk, and the flour was not as fine as it usually was. "Strange," Joseph thought, "but I will make the best of it." The millstone, worn out from the heavy workload, began to crack. The once solid stone now had deep fissures. Joseph felt a pang of worry in his chest, knowing that if the millstone broke, he wouldn't be able to finish the work. It had served him well for many years, but now it was on the verge of giving way. Joseph worked as long as he could, but one fateful evening, the millstone finally cracked in half. The noise was loud and unmistakable. Joseph stood there, staring at the broken stone, knowing that without it, he could not continue his work. Worse yet, he didn't have the money to replace it. His only hope was Mark. The moment the millstone cracked, Joseph felt a sinking weight in his chest. He had worked so hard, pushing his aging millstone to its limits, all for the sake of completing Mark's order. But now, with the stone broken, he couldn't finish the job. Joseph had always believed that hard work would see him through any difficulty, but this was different. This was something he couldn't fix by himself. Joseph sat on the ground, staring at the broken stone. The soft hum of the stream outside seemed to mock his helplessness. He had no choice but to face the truth. Without a new millstone, the mill would be useless. And fixing the stone would cost more money than he had in his pocket. Peter, the young apprentice, saw the broken millstone and came running over. "What happened, Master Joseph?" he asked, his face full of concern. Joseph stood up slowly, wiping his hands on his trousers. "It's broken, Peter. The millstone cracked from the heavy work. I don't have the money to replace it." Peter's face fell. He knew how hard Joseph had worked to make the mill run smoothly. They couldn't afford to stop working. "What will we do now?" Joseph took a deep breath, trying to calm himself. "I'll have to ask Mark for the payment. Without it, I cannot fix the millstone, and we won't be able to grind any more flour." But Joseph already knew deep down that Mark might not pay. Mark had never shown any true kindness or honesty, but Joseph had trusted him anyway. He had hoped that Mark's offer was sincere, but now, with the millstone broken, the reality of Mark's greed became clearer. The following morning, Joseph carried a small sack of flour to Mark's house, determined to ask for the payment he was owed. The sack was not large, but it was all he had managed to grind before the millstone cracked. As he walked through the streets, he felt the weight of his worries on his shoulders. What if Mark refused to pay? What if he continued to deceive Joseph? Mark's house was a grand building at the center of the village, far from the humble mill Joseph ran. It was filled with luxury and excess, the kind of place that always seemed cold and distant, a sharp contrast to Joseph's warmth and simplicity. As Joseph entered the front gate, he was met by Mark's servant, who led him through a lavish hallway into a well-furnished parlor. Mark was seated at a large table, counting a stack of gold coins when Joseph entered. He looked up with a fake smile, the same one he had worn when he made the deal. "Ah, Joseph, what brings you here today?" Mark asked, his tone dripping with false sweetness. Joseph held out the sack of flour. "Here is the flour, Mark. I've worked hard to grind it, but my millstone broke during the process. I need payment so I can fix it and continue working." Mark's eyes narrowed as he eyed the sack. "Broken, you say?" he replied, pretending to be concerned. "Well, I'm afraid that's not my problem. You still owe me more work, Joseph. Don't forget that." Joseph's heart sank. He had hoped for a fair response, but Mark was as deceitful as ever. "But I've already worked for days, Mark. You agreed to pay me for my work, and I can't keep grinding without a millstone." Mark leaned back in his chair and crossed his arms, a smug smile playing at the corners of his lips. "That's not my concern, Joseph. Perhaps you should have been more careful with your equipment. When the work is done, then you'll get paid. Until then, you'll have to keep working." Joseph's fists clenched in frustration. He had trusted Mark, and now Mark was taking advantage of his hard work. He didn't know how he could fix the situation, But he wasn't going to give up so easily. As he left Mark's house, a plan began to form in his mind. It wasn't just about getting the money anymore. It was about showing the villagers the truth about Mark. That evening, Joseph sat outside his mill, staring at the broken stone. The sun was setting, casting an orange glow across the fields of wheat. The peaceful sound of the stream was a reminder of the simplicity of his life. But now, with the millstone broken and Mark refusing to pay, things had become complicated. Joseph thought about his options. He could try to confront Mark again, but that would likely only lead to more frustration. Mark was stubborn and deceitful, and Joseph knew that. No, he needed a different approach. He had to outsmart Mark and expose his dishonesty without causing a scene or making things worse for himself. Then it hit him. He could invite Mark to a gathering. The village was always full of people who enjoyed a good social event. Why not host a gathering where he could share his flour with the villagers, and in doing so, reveal Mark's true nature? It was a risk, but it was the only option Joseph had left. Joseph smiled to himself, a spark of hope lighting up his heart. He began to make plans for the gathering. He would offer the flour for free, but not just to be generous. He would tell a story that would make Mark's greed clear to everyone. The next day, word spread quickly through the village that Joseph was offering free flour. People were excited. They knew Joseph was kind and generous, and they were eager to receive his gift. Families came from all around the village, bringing baskets and bowls to fill with flour. As the sun set, Joseph stood by the entrance of his mill, greeting everyone with a warm smile. The villagers were happy, chatting among themselves as they waited for their turn to fill their baskets with flour. Mark, having heard about the gathering, couldn't resist coming. He saw this as an opportunity to get free flour for himself, and his greed got the better of him. He arrived with an arrogant smile on his face, boasting to anyone who would listen about his wealth and importance. "Joseph should be grateful I'm here," he said loudly, "for I am the one who brought the work to him. He owes me much more than this measly offering." Joseph watched Mark as he entered the gathering. The merchant's pride and arrogance were impossible to ignore. Joseph knew this was his moment. It was time to teach Mark a lesson. As the gathering continued, Joseph stood up and cleared his throat. The crowd grew quiet, sensing that Joseph had something important to say. With a calm voice, he began, "Friends, I want to share a story with you." The villagers leaned in, eager to hear what Joseph had to say. Once there was a miller who worked hard every day to grind the wheat of the villagers. He was honest, kind, and trustworthy. One day, a merchant came to the miller with an offer. "Grind my wheat," the merchant said, "and I will pay you well." The miller, trusting the merchant, agreed. But the merchant had no intention of paying fairly. Instead, he gave the miller counterfeit coins and refused to pay him when the miller needed it most. When the miller went to ask for payment, the merchant laughed and said, "You still owe me more work." Joseph paused, looking around at the villagers. They were listening closely, nodding in understanding. Then he turned to Mark, who had been standing in the back, looking uncomfortable. "Do you know anyone like this merchant?" Joseph asked, his eyes meeting Mark's. Mark's face turned red, and he opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. The villagers exchanged looks, their expressions turning from curiosity to disapproval. "Mark," Joseph continued, "is this not the truth? Is this not what you have done to me?